Hello, my name is Catherine and I work with SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the 50 affordable rental units at Alta 412 at Abington Station. And the purpose of this session is to give some information about the available apartments, but also to cover the application and eligibility and lottery processes, and to give you a little bit of information about what to expect after the lottery is run. So if you have any questions after or during this session, I should say, you're encouraged to either type them into the Zoom chat function, or you were muted as you came into this meeting, but you can unmute yourself to ask a question. So I'll be asking throughout the presentation if anyone has any questions on what they've heard. So this is a live session. It's being recorded, so we can save it to our YouTube channel, SEB Housing's YouTube channel after tonight, for anyone who was not able to join us that wants to review it. So if you have any issues viewing the screen, or if you have any questions, again, please let me know. But just for some background information on who we are, so SEB Housing, we are an off-site affordable housing consulting group. So we're not the on-site management team or the leasing office for Alta, but we've been hired by the developer to market the affordable units, conduct this information session, and collect and review applications to determine whether or not households are eligible for the lottery. And then we will eventually be the ones running the lottery as well. So in the initial phases, we are everyone's main point of contact rather than the management office. But then further along in the process, you'll be in touch with the management team at Alta 412, and they'll take over as your main point of contact after the lottery. So there's a few steps in the process, the first being to apply for the lottery. And SEB Housing will determine if you're eligible for the affordable housing program based off of what you self-report on that application. And the second step is you'll be in touch with the leasing office after the lottery, and they'll determine your lease eligibility. So that's separate from the screenings that you'll have with SEB Housing, and your lease eligibility will be determined by, things such as a credit check or a rental history check, criminal background check, that sort of thing that you might be familiar with from renting elsewhere. And then the third step in the process, once you've been approved by the management or leasing office and found to be lease eligible based off of their criteria, you'll be directed back to SEB Housing. And that's the point in the process where you would need to submit supporting documentation like pay stubs to verify the income that your household has, bank statements for your assets, and that sort of thing. So again, the first step in the process is to apply for the lottery with SEB Housing, and then those two other steps come after the lottery is held. And the lottery is scheduled for, I believe, December 29th. So while your applications need to be in by December 15th, the actual lottery won't be taking place until a couple weeks after that. So if you haven't already, we encourage you to go to our website. There is a listing for Alta 412 at Abington Station, and if you click on that listing, you're going to see a page specific to this property. There'll be a downloadable version of the application, but there'll also be a QR code and a link to the online application. We encourage everyone to complete it online if you're able to. It is going to be the quickest way to apply and assure that your application is received by us right away. So once you've submitted that online application, you'll receive a confirmation email that's instantaneously sent back to you. So it's kind of like a bounce back email. It says that your application was received. And then later on, a week or two later, you'll get a more personalized email from SEB Housing once we've actually reviewed your application. If for any reason the online option is not an option for you, you could download the lottery application. There's a PDF on our website, and you could either email it back to us, send it by regular mail, or drop it in our Dropbox if you're in the Needham area. That's where our office is located. And so whichever one of those options works best for you, but we do encourage you to complete the application online if you're able to. And it is fairly brief, no matter how you fill it out, because I mentioned there's no reason to, or there's no need to send in supporting income, asset, or tax documentation at this stage in the process. So it's just self-reporting your income and assets and applications are due by November 15th at 2 p.m. And I say by 2 p.m. because the online application will actually shut down and won't be active after 2 p.m. on the 15th. So you want to make sure if you're planning to apply online that you do so before December 15th at 2 p.m. And you don't need to be a resident of Abington to apply for this lottery. I'll talk a little bit more about local preference in a few minutes, but just know that you do not need to live in the town to apply. And we've been told that the first affordable units at the property are going to be available for occupancy in March, but they do plan to pre-lease. The leasing team over at Alta 412 plans to pre-lease units shortly after the lottery. And of course, once all required applicant screenings have been completed. So there shouldn't be a delay between the lottery and the screening process. So late December, early January is when you would be in touch with the management office or the leasing team over at Alta 412 if you were one of the top households on the waiting list. There are affordable 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments being offered. And the breakdown is listed on your screen right now. So there's 12 one-bedroom apartments that will rent for $1,713. 2 of those one bedrooms have disabled accessible features, and one of those disabled accessible units also has hearing impairment features as well. There's 20 2-bedroom apartments. They will rent for $2,013, and 2 of those 2-bedroom units are also disabled accessible. There's 6 3-bedroom apartments that will rent for $2,275. So the community has some resort-like amenities that you might have seen in our information packet. So there's a fitness center, there's an outdoor pool, which is pictured on your screen right now. There's a grill and outdoor lounge areas, there's a dog park and a spa. Each of the units features in-unit laundry, so there's a washer and dryer in each unit, and there is a parking space included for each tenant. Tenants will pay the cost of utilities, and those are all electric, and as well as water and sewer will be the tenant's responsibility by a sub-meter. So the affordable units at Alta 412 were selected by the owner, and they were approved by Mass Housing, which is the state agency that oversees the affordable housing program. And the units are representative of the building's units as a whole. So that means they're not the smallest, they're not all clustered in one location of the building, so they're not identifiable as being an affordable unit in any way to anyone that's, walking down the hall. The affordable rents are set in accordance with are not set in accordance with an applicant's income or financial circumstances. So this program doesn't function like a voucher or a subsidy program. So it means that your rent doesn't change if your income changes. So for this program, the rents are set using a formula based off of HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, their area median income for the Brockton metro area. So the rent could increase once per year. That typically happens in the spring when the new area median incomes are released by HUD. There would always be advance written notice, and your rent would never increase within a lease term. So if you were to sign a lease for March 1st of 2026, your rent will be the same until at least March of 2027. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can chime in, let me know. I'm going to move on to the eligibility requirements for the affordable housing program. So there's 4 eligibility requirements that you may have seen in our information packet that's available on the website as well. The first is that households have to have qualifying income. So on your screen, as you can see, there is a maximum income limit. So that's 80% of Brockton's area median income, which is where Abington falls. And I'll talk more about those in just a minute, but your household income would have to be below those amounts based on your household size. So if you're a 1-person household, you can't make above $72,950, or you'd be considered over income for this lottery. And then it goes up from there depending on your household size, all the way up to 6 household members.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I was just curious. So obviously, like I would qualify for two incomes because me and my fiance, and then we have two kids. So we would be a four-person household,
Yep.
but we would still qualify like based on what our, there's just our two income.
Yeah, and the total household income. So as long
Okay.
as your total household income is under 104,200, then yes.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yep. Mhm.
Perfect. Sorry. Thank you.
No, no problem. Ask away. The second eligibility requirement is that households can't own a home upon move-in. So if anyone is selling a home and looking to rent afterwards, you would need to be off that home's deed in order to reserve one of the affordable apartments at Alta 412. And then the third eligibility requirement to keep in mind is that household priority on the waiting list that are generated after the lottery are going to be based on household composition. So generally this means if you're a four-person household, you're going to have priority for larger unit sizes than a one-person household would. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to apply for a larger unit. If you're, a married couple, for example, you can apply for a two-bedroom unit. For this particular lottery, you do want to keep in mind, though, that one-person households can't apply for two-bedroom units, and two-person households can't apply for three-bedroom units unless a household member has a disability, which requires a reasonable accommodation for that extra bedroom. But like I said, if you're only planning to use one bedroom, if you're a couple that's going to be sharing a bed and then you're going to use the other bedroom, as long as there's two people in that household, you can apply for a two-bedroom. But there are some restrictions for this lottery in terms of household size and what you'd apply for. And then the fourth eligibility criteria, this doesn't come up very often, but households can't have financial interest in the development or be considered what the program refers to as a related party. So if you work for the developer or the management company, you wouldn't be eligible for this lottery. So actually the four of those eligibility criteria are on your screen right now, so you can have a closer look. I'm going to circle back to income limits though. So those income limits that were on your screen, and I'll put back up there in a minute, are the affordable housing program requirements. So they're set in stone. If you're, $100 over them, you're not going to be eligible for the lottery, unfortunately. So these affordable units are being made available to rent at prices that are lower than identical units, market rate units at the property, which is why they're being discounted. So maximum rents are set by household size, as you can see here. And although you don't need to submit verifying information like pay stubs or tax returns or social security statements, for example, you want to make sure that you're accurately self-reporting what your income is so you're not disappointed later when we have to verify and you're not eligible. So do the best you can to estimate all of the household income that's coming in, not just wages, but bonuses, overtime, anything like that, social security payments, child support, anything like that that applies to you. And so I'll give you a basic overview as to how your income is going to be counted, even though you don't need to submit that verifying income yet. So if you are found to be eligible for this lottery, you'll get an email from SEB Housing, and it will have a link to a documentation requirements guide. And that guide is kind of giving you, it's a packet that's going to give you a rundown of the verifying information that you are going to need to submit after the lottery, assuming that you're called forward to move forward in the process if you're one of the top households on the waiting list. So how many pay stubs, and that sort of thing. So take a look at that once you receive it if you're eligible for this lottery. And keep in mind too that we have to count gross income. So the amount that your household makes before taxes if you're working. Although, many of us are not taking home the full amount of your salary, it is gross income that this affordable program requires that we use. How we calculate that income is not one size fits all. So income circumstances are unique. There's some people who are earning a weekly salary and it's consistent throughout the year, but there are other people who are self-employed or working seasonally. In those circumstances, if your income is more sporadic, we may need to look further into the past to be able to project your anticipated income over the next 12 months. If you're self-employed, you're going to need to provide a profit and loss statement and provide supporting documentation for your business. Generally, if you have business expenses, we can take those into account, but it is gross income for anyone who's not self-employed that we need to count. And like I said, this is all income coming into your household. So if you have a child under 18, we will not count their wage, but that's really the only exception. You want to make sure that you're listing everything else on your application. So in general, too, any income you have been making in the past, we're going to have to assume you'll be making it going forward unless we have definitive documentation stating that you're no longer earning that income source. So maybe you have 2 jobs listed on your tax returns, but one of the jobs is no longer, you're no longer at one of the jobs. We'll need to have some sort of verification that that job is no longer active. So when you're filling out the application, whether or not it's a paper application or online, just make sure that you are listing all wages, Social Security, unemployment, pension payments, anything like that that might be coming into your household. There's no minimum income for the affordable housing program, but you'll see that there's an approximate minimum income listed here and in the documents that you may have already seen. That is set by the management company at Alta 412. So pretty much every management team has a minimum income that they want to make sure that every tenant, whether or not the tenant is market rate or is going to be renting an affordable unit, they have that minimum income amount to make sure that you're able to afford the rent. So in this case, this is equal to 2.5 times the rent. So if you're renting a 1-bedroom, you would need to have income between $51,300 and the maximum income limit that the program has set for your household size. So if you have a housing subsidy, though, you can see that there's an exception for that. So if you have a Section 8 voucher, an MRBP voucher, or anything like that that you plan to use at this property, you can ignore the minimum incomes because your income, your tenant share is going to be limited because the agency that administers your voucher is going to be paying a portion of your rent. So you don't need to worry about those minimum incomes if you have a voucher. But if you don't have a voucher, your income needs to be between those 2 approximate minimum income amounts and the program maximum income limit. There's a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to the minimum incomes because if the leasing team over at Alta 412 decides, you have a lot of liquid assets, maybe you have a lot of money in the bank, you have assets that you'd be able to access to pay rent, they could potentially look at your finances and decide that you meet the approximate minimum income amount. So there is some wiggle room there, but the maximum income limits are set in stone because they are program requirements. So applicants who, like I said, without a voucher need to be in those 2 amounts. There is no, speaking of assets, there is no asset limit for affordable rental lotteries. So you could have quite a bit in the bank, maybe you're retired, looking to downsize. None of that is going to work against you. We do need to collect bank statements, even though there is no asset limit. And the reason for that is any assets that are generating income need to be counted, a portion of them need to be counted as income towards your total household income. So when you're filling out the asset section, just make sure you're filling that out entirely, not just checking and savings accounts, but if you have a 401k, for example, or a Venmo or PayPal account even is considered an asset. So keep that in mind. Just a reminder, any questions, let me know. And in terms of lottery eligibility, so if you're interested in applying, we do encourage you to get your lottery application into us as soon as possible to get the process started. And I do want to mention too that you can apply for more than 1 unit size. So if you think you're interested in both a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, you should indicate that on your application. There's no downside to doing that. but there is a potential downside if you only list, a 2-bedroom. And because later on, if you decide that you might be interested in another apartment size, you'll be at the end of that waiting list. If you didn't have both the 2-bedroom and the 3-bedroom indicated on your lottery application. So if you submit your application and SEB Housing is going to review it, we'll contact you if there's anything that appears to be missing, or if you get a bounce back email saying, or not bounce back email, but if you get an email from us saying that you've been denied and you think that maybe that's incorrect, maybe you made a typo in the online application, please reach back out to us. That does happen a lot with the online application. You might have, added an extra 0 or whatever it might be. So if you think that you should have been eligible for this lottery and you get an email saying that you are not eligible, please reach out to us. So if you are found eligible for the lottery, you'll be sent an email with your lottery application number. That will be in the form of a series of numbers. So if you were the very first person to be to have sent in your application and have it be approved for this lottery, your lottery application number would be A.001, for example. That's just an anonymous identifier for you when we are running the lottery. So, it doesn't mean you're not ranked in any way at this point, but that will be the lottery application number that you want to have handy when we're doing the lottery, because it will be called during the lottery. And that email that you get from us with your lottery application number will also have confirmation as to whether or not your household qualifies for local preference. So you would have self-reported on your application if you believe that your household qualifies for that preference. So if you live in Abington, or you work in the town, work full-time in the town, or work at a business, located in the town, or if you have a child attending Abington Public Schools, those are all qualifiers for a household to be considered local preference. You don't need to submit verification of that until after the lottery, but you do want to make sure that you're reporting that accurately, because if you report that you're local preference and you're not, then you will lose your position on the waiting list. So make sure that you're filling that out accurately. There are some affordable units at Alta 412 that have local preference, which means that on the waiting list, some households that have local preference are going to have priority for units when compared to households who don't have local preference. So there's a lot more information about that in our information packet. I believe it's the last page, but just keep that in mind. There are also some waiting lists that don't have local preference. When you're reviewing that email from us that has the lottery application number, it's also going to confirm whether or not you indicated that you needed a accessible unit, and confirms how many bedrooms you're looking for. So make sure you're reviewing that and make sure that it looks accurate to you. It's possible that there could be a mistake in there, so you want to make sure you catch it so you'll be on the correct waiting list when the time comes. On your application, you will have also indicated your household type, so either 1, 2, or 3. And the information packet also has a lot more information on household types and the priorities on the waiting list. But as an example, a type 1 household, that might consist of 2 adults who share a bedroom. They can apply for a 2-bedroom unit. But all type 2 and 3 households are going to have priority over that type 1 household on the waiting list. So that means that type 2 or type 3 households are going to have higher positions on the waiting list on the 2-bedroom waiting list than any type 1 household. And again, just keep in mind that 1-person households can't live in 2-bedroom units, and 2-person households can't live in 3-bedroom units unless there is a disability that requires that extra bedroom. So the lottery will be held virtually. Go back here. Will be held virtually on December 29th at 6 p.m. It'll be much in the same format as this. It's a Zoom call where there's a screen share and you're able to view the drawing, the digital drawing. So it will be a digital drawing on. We use a website called random.org, and it basically randomizes the numbers so you're able to see it instantaneously. Every lottery number will be included or drawn in the lottery, Sometimes when you think of lotteries, you think there's just going to be, if there's 50 units, there's going to be 50 numbers drawn, but that's not the way that these types of lotteries work, because everyone is going to have a position on the waiting list. If your number is, sorted higher on the waiting list, then you're going to have you'll be called forward first to move forward with leasing one of the units. So in general, it is more beneficial for your number to be called early or drawn early. But it's not the deciding factor as to whether or not you're going to be moving forward in the process, because we still need to sort the results onto the waiting list. So, for example, if a qualified type 1 household, like a 2-person couple, is drawn first in the lottery, but they've only applied for a 2-bedroom unit, they're not going to be first on the waiting list. They're going to be further down the waiting list behind all of the type 2 households on that 2-bedroom waiting list. There's also going to be households who apply who are found to be ineligible by either the leasing office or by SEB housing, or maybe just people who ultimately decide not to rent at this property. So if your number is drawn further down on the waiting list, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to move forward in the process. But people ahead of you will have to drop off the waiting list before you're called forward. So the waiting list on the evening of December 29th will be populated and sent to everybody by email. So you don't have to be in attendance at the lottery, because you will be sent the results later on that evening after the results have been sorted. If you attend during the lottery, you're not going to know your position on the waiting list until later anyway. So when you're reviewing that email after the lottery takes place, you're going to find your lottery application number on the waiting list and see where you fall. At that point, you'll have an idea as to whether or not you're going to be moving forward to the next step in the process, which is to apply for a lease. So following the lottery, we're going to connect the top households from each waiting list with the management team. So your contact information will also be provided to the management team, and you'll be put in touch with one another to apply for their lease. And once you're doing the lease eligibility screening, I mentioned that you'll be doing, a credit check, that sort of thing, and that is separate from SEB's lease screening. So they'll make the determination if you're eligible to lease with them, and if you are, then you will be sent back to SEB Housing to complete your program certification, which basically means that you will then need to submit all of your income, asset, and tax documentation to SEB Housing. So remember, when you apply for the lottery, you only are self-reporting what your income is. And if you are approved by the leasing office and have reserved one of the affordable apartments, that's the point in the process where SEB Housing will ask you to submit all of your information to us. And then if you're approved, meaning that we have confirmed that your income means that you're eligible for this affordable housing program, you'll be able to sign the lease with the leasing office and for the unit that you've already reserved with them. And you'll be able to decide with them what your lease date will be. It doesn't have to be on the first of the month. And I want to say too that, when you're doing your program certification with SEB Housing, so when you're submitting all of your pay stubs and asset documentation to us, it is a lot of information. So no worries at all if you're not able to get everything into us on the first try. We'll send you an incomplete notice, and we work with you to make that happen. We understand that there is a lot of documentation that's required. So once you're leased, you are done with screenings, income screenings, until your lease renewal date. So we hope that you love living at Alta and you want to continue living there beyond the first year of the lease. If you do, you'll need to recertify your income with the leasing office prior to your lease renewal. So say you move in on March 1st, around this time next year, the leasing office over at Alta 412 is going to be requesting, updated pay stubs from you and all of that to recertify your income. If your income has increased while you're living in the affordable apartment, so it's increased above the 80% of area median income, that's fine. Households remain eligible for the affordable apartment as long as the household income doesn't exceed 140% of the current year's area median income. So that means if you're still under 140% of the area median income, you would be able to continue renting the affordable apartment at that discounted rent. So to give you an idea of that, a household of two would qualify for this lottery if you were making under, if your household was making under $83,400. That same family can make up to $116,700 at the time of their recertification in order to remain eligible for the affordable apartment. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. If you get a raise, if you get a new higher paying job, whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that you will now need to pay market rent necessarily, depending on that income boost. So that about covers what I wanted to get to. I'm going to go back to the first slide here just so you have the link to the online application. That is on our website. It's also on the digital version of the application. We encourage you, if you're interested in this opportunity, to get that application in before 2 o'clock on December 15th. So a little bit under a month now if you haven't applied yet. And if you're watching this recording after the fact, or if you have any questions you didn't think of tonight, please email us at info@sdbhousing.com. That's the quickest way to get in touch with us. There's also a phone number as well if you want to call us. Any other questions before I conclude?
I do have one question. So I had applied and I got my lottery number. Now, is there like two separate, like since I'm a local preference, is there two separate like applications, or like is that application like will there be two drawings, I guess?
There's going to be two drawings, but it's a little confusing because I'm going to go to, you know what, I'm going to pull up the information packet real quick. So there is two drawings, but everyone, regardless of whether or not their local preference, has a position on all of the waiting lists that they applied for. So if you're if you applied for a 2-bedroom apartment, as you can see here, that person would have a position on the 2-bedroom waiting list, whether or not their local preference. The local preference households will have a higher position on the waiting list if they're the same household type. But yes, so there'll be two drawings. Only the local preference households will be included in the first drawing, and that just kind of informs the positions within each waiting list. So I brought this up just because it's confusing for anybody, really. I'm not sure why it's set up this way, but if you are a local preference household, you're going to have a position on both the local preference waiting list and these open waiting lists, that assuming that you apply for a unit that is under here. But if you're only applying for, I think your household, if you have 4 people in the household, if you're only applying for a 2 or 3 bedroom unit, you will have priority on those waiting lists.
Okay. Thank you so much. And then I think, oh, she has a question too.
Yeah, what happened if someone moved out after the first year? You can move out. You mean I think you probably mean if a member of your household moves out. If a member of your household moves out and you no longer are eligible for that bedroom size, you would contact the leasing office and they would see if there's, a 2-bedroom. If you were in 3, there's a 2-bedroom that you can now rent, and you'd work that out with the leasing office at that time. Did you have another question to learn?
Yeah, sorry. My last question is, say you don't make it on the lottery, like your number doesn't get pulled or whatever, and then, so say 2 people move out of their complexes within like 6 months, is there like 2 more names that will get pulled, or do they just become like regular complexes?
So everyone is going to have a position on the waiting list, so we don't need to do another drawing when a vacancy occurs.
Okay.
Yeah, but the answer is yes. Like, you're going to remain on the waiting list. So say you're the last person on one of the waiting lists and all the units were leased. If next year 5 people move out and we've now the leasing office has now made it down to your position on the waiting list, you'd be contacted to see if you're interested in the opportunity. And anyone who doesn't lease up these units at first, you'll remain on the waiting list, and the leasing office should be reaching out to everyone annually to confirm whether or not you want to stay on the waiting list.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Is there preference to the two people that that attended the informational meeting? Do they get bonus?
That would be nice, right? There's a bunch of applicants, so there is a lot of interest.
Okay.
Um, you know, it does make it easier to apply online, obviously. So there are going to be people dropping, as you can
Right.
see, there's 11, or so there's 22 one bedrooms. Um, we're going to have to screen more than 22 people to fill those units. So it's very unlikely that, the first people on the waiting list will be the only ones with the
Okay.
ability to lease a unit. So that's the bright side.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep. If there's no other questions, just a reminder to reach out to us if you're watching this after the fact. We're happy to answer any other questions, and we look forward to getting your application.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Good night, everybody.